Welcome everyone to this LLF session to celebrate the life of Mahmood Jamal. And here with us, we have his family and close associates, people who worked with him and meant a lot to him in his life. So in fact, without further ado, I'm going to start, and the order of play for those who are going to join the session is that his brother Barimia, his sister Farida Jamal will join us from Karachi and Singapore. His brothers Ahmad Jamal and Moin Jamal will join us from London and from Canada. And his sisters Humaira Jamal and Amina Jamal will join us from London and from Canada, respectively. His dear friend and work associate and much more than that, Farooq Thondi, commissioning editor of Mahmood's years at Channel 4, will join us from London. And it's difficult for me to put into words the relationship that Mahmood Mia had with Raja Mahmoodabad, Suleiman Bhai, who is going to close the session for us. So without further ado, and of course I forgot, sorry Francis, Professor Francis Robinson, with whom Mahmood had a very profound and close scholarly association, and I think an association that goes back many decades to Professor Robinson's own work at on Farangi Mahal. So without further ado, let's start with Barimia and Farida Jamal Sahiba, and over to you.
Thank you, Chini and LLF, for putting up this thing for Mahmood. And between me and my sister, what I want to talk about is our vague memories of early days, which we had together. Mahmood happened to be my brother, but he was a very good friend. And we have gone through life together, from school to college to living in London, and the time he spent with me in Karachi. But at the outset, one thing I want to say is that Mahmood's association or love of poetry and literature and these things were first instilled in us by my mother, who, when we were children, used to teach us 3 books, used to read 3 books, and what was Bangadira, Musaddas-e-Hali, and Shahnama Islam. And I think that is where Mahmood got the taste for poetry and literature. And then after that, he went to London and things. But Mahmood and I were together in Dhaka. We went to school together. We used to play cricket together. And we used to play a lot of chess sitting at home 2, 3 in the morning. And the chess was taught to us by Chaudhry Khaliful Zaman, who happened to be staying with us. And he and his brother used to play, and that's where we started learning to play chess. And Mahmood was a very good chess player and a very good leg spinner. And when the English team had come to Dhaka, and they were trying to make a pitch that does not take spin, the coach of the Pakistan team happened to be the coach of our team. And he told them to call Mahmood Jamal to bowl, and if he cannot spin it, nobody can, because they were scared of Underwood. So Mahmood was excelled in whatever he did. And then the time actually is in Dhaka, where we used to go after school. We used to go to study Arabic, He studied Arabic, he studied Persian, Urdu, of course, but we used to go to study Arabic from Maulana Abdul Rahman Al-Kashgari, who was the head of the Department of Arabic at Madrasa Aliyah in Dhaka. And after school, we both of us used to go by cycling for 4 or 5 miles every afternoon to learn Arabic. But Mahmood, of course, didn't carry it on. And I learned it while I lived in Saudi Arabia. Appi, you have anything to say on the beginning of the thing?
What Barimia is saying about Mahmood and himself, I was always there too when all this was happening. Of course, I'm older than them. We were doing a lot of things, studying, we did together. We were growing up in Frangi Mahal and also in Dhaka. But many things they did which I didn't do. But we were always there, you know, playing the chess or badbazi or whatever. And we had a lot of interaction. With Mahmood, I continued with this interaction just like with Baimi. And in the last year, in fact, we were talking almost every day because of the COVID. And I wasn't working, he was home. We had a lot of, and we had a wonderful time. And one of the things that Mahmood told me was that it's worthwhile to hold on to memories, but let go of nostalgia. And this is what I've been trying to do since December 23rd when we lost him. He would like what we are doing, I think. He would want us to celebrate and remember all the wonderful things. I think I'm going to stop here because I want to hear what everyone else will be saying.
I've spent a lot of time with Mahmood traveling, and in London when I used to stay with him. And again, like she mentioned, the COVID, I got stuck in London, and the longest time I've ever stayed in London for 5-6 months. And between my brother Alauddin and Mahmood, and we used to discuss all the things he was working on, poetry, he was writing, his filmmaking, and even till the last day, we used to talk 3-4 times a day about the things he was doing, and it's all related to his poetry and writing and putting together a lot of my father's papers and things which he had and organizing them. Of course, Professor Robinson was a guide in that, in whatever he did in that field. And what can I say? I mean, he was a very humble man and a man of many talents, a lot of which I found out after his death, that he had written some of the works I did not know he has done. But he was there every time we used to discuss poetry, or if we had to write anything, and if my friends would ask me to translate something, and I used to send it to Mahmood to translate it into English.
So we will move now to Ahmed Jamal and to Moin, and talk a little bit about the time that Mahmood was in London, and part of the time when Moin actually joined him in London. I think it was for 5 years. And so over to Ahmed Jamal.
Moin came to London before I did, and he was here when the Troubadour was in his heyday, and he spent time with Mahmood, living with him and going to the Troubadour. I sort of came in the mid-70s, so I let Moin tell us about his arrival in London and his experience in the Troubadour. Moin?
Yeah. I want to thank everyone who's taking part in celebrating Mahmood's life. And there are certain things I want to share. I hope I don't run out of time. I've never done this sort of thing before, so I'm a little nervous and I don't know what I'll be talking about. But I would like to say one thing that I shared with him in common, which I think is very unique between me and him, as opposed to any of my brothers and sisters, that we shared the same horoscope, because we are both Pisces. And I feel that we had a lot of communication because of that, a lot of understanding, a lot of comfort with each other. And I would also like to disclose at this, this opportunity which I've been given, that when I was going through a devastating disorder, it was Mahmood who came and took me at a time when I wouldn't take myself with him. And he took me to London when I was socially unlivable and I had a lot of issues going on. And I owe him a lot because of that. He came at that time and took me to London. And he helped me like a parent would help, not like a sibling. And I lived with him for years. We used to share rooms and I was unlivable. I was breaking every rule. And I don't remember one time that he was angry with me or annoyed with me, though there were a lot of reasons to do that. He was highly respected as a troubadour, as a very talented person, very admired with his roommates. We were all living in single rooms. He would always find me a better room than himself.
Farooq, we want you to talk about your friendship and your work with Mahmood, and you've got 10 minutes.
Mahmood, apart from being a fantastic poet, a very efficient translator, and a pioneer in the broadcasting history, I would say, of Britain, was also a dear, dear friend. And that friendship was full of good times, full of badmashi, mischief, all sorts of things that we did together, talked about together. And we first met, I suppose. I was aware of him as a poet, but the first time we met really was when he became, when he proposed programs for Channel 4. I was the commissioning editor, and it was my job. It wasn't no great pioneering mission. It was my job to get, to integrate the new communities of Britain, which means Asians, West Indians, Africans, Chinese even, into the mainstream of British culture and British socio-political existence. Now, television, of course, is the biggest conversation that a nation can have with itself. Films are okay, books are there, they're all creative enterprises, but television is the nation's conversation. And you can be sure that television is broader than the particular narrow focuses that a left-wing newspaper or a right-wing newspaper or a liberal newspaper or a fascist newspaper has. Television embraces everybody. And one of the tasks that one had in the 80s, 90s, and on was to integrate the new communities of Britain into the life of this television, into this conversation. And I can say that with great confidence that Mahmood was one of the people who actually took that task creatively and seriously.
So thank you for that, Farooq. And I'm now going to invite Humaira Jamal, Amina Jamal.
There's so much to say about Mahmood, and everybody has said a lot of it, but there's a huge, a world of things to say. I just want to add to what everybody has already said, that you're getting a picture of someone who was an exceptional person in his personal as well as his political and social projects. And that really expresses who Mahmood was.
I guess from what I'll follow from Minno, she's already said, and others have said lots of things about Mahmood. My relationship with Mahmood being his youngest sister, I don't remember much about Dhaka days. And I remember a little bit about Karachi. So I really got to know Mahmood and developed my real close relationship in London when I came in the late 80s to complete my higher specialist training. And like Moin, I stayed with Mahmood, and he always was, his house was always open to us. In the 90s, my parents used to visit, and he opened his flat to all of us and lots of other extended family. I have lots of happy memories of spending time with my parents, with all my cousins, lots of batbazi, playing court piece, and much, much more. Mahmood was an excellent cook, having learned from my mother, and also probably previously. And often he would cook, and my mother would cook. That's when I learned how to cook desi food, because I didn't know anything. I couldn't even make an omelette. More recently, Mahmood and I became very close when he stayed with me. And what I noticed was he was working so hard in so many projects, especially particularly the last couple of years. It felt like he knew he was going to run out of time, which probably I am too, I think.
Thank you. Over to Professor Francis Robinson, who needs no introduction, really.
Well, I'd be nice to say something about Mahmood Jamal as a scholar. And I first came to know Mahmood in London in the mid-1970s. A friendship developed, and we began to meet on a regular basis. Mahmood was the keeper of his father, Maulana Jamal Mian of Firangi Mahal's private papers. Jamal Mian died in 2012, and his family kindly agreed that I should write his biography, which was published by OUP Karachi in 2019. This task meant that Mahmood and I came to meet much more frequently, both in London and in Karachi. One point at which Mahmood's help was of particular value was in deciphering entries in his father's diaries. From 1939, Jamal Mian had kept detailed diaries, and these helped to bring a real sense of the person to his biography. Mahmood was a brilliant translator from Urdu into English, able to do so accurately and at speed. Initially, he was worried about the image of his father that the papers might give. But the scholar in him said that we should go with what the papers said. And this, with a few small exceptions, is what we did. Without Mahmood's help, my biography would only have been half of what it is. Mahmood was a wonderful friend who understood the central Sufi message that loving one's fellow human beings was an important step on the road to loving God. By his death, Mahmood had published 3 scholarly editions of poetry: The Penguin Modern Urdu Poetry, 1980, The Penguin Islamic Mystical Poetry, 2009, and Fair's 50 Poems, 2011. And I hope that his Iqbal, 50 Poems, will appear very soon. Moreover, we'd been discussing 2 further publications which arose from his father's papers. The first was a travelogue written by his father in 1950, when he made a visit from Lucknow to Pakistan. There are many fascinating revelations. For instance, Jamal Mian's amazement that the value of the rupee in India and Pakistan had diverged, being worth substantially more against the pound sterling in Pakistan than in India. And second, that the common people had taken to holding Qawwali sessions over the grave of Jinnah, which did not at this time have its mausoleum. The second possible publication was the report of a delegation sent by the Khilafat Committee in India in 1926 to investigate the damage done to the holy places in the Hijaz by Abdulaziz ibn Saud and his Wahhabi followers. The report contains photographs of the damage done and bruising letters exchanged between the delegation and Abdulaziz's court. We did not think a Pakistani publisher would risk taking on this publication, but thought we might succeed in India. Mahmood's approach to his scholarship is best illustrated by the front matter in his Islamic mystical poetry. First of all, he acknowledges from where he derived inspiration and Sufi knowledge. His ancestor, Abdullah Ansari of Herat, who died in 1088. His grandfather, Maulana Abdul Bari of Firangi Mahal. His maternal grandfather, Shah Hayat Ahmad of Rudauli Sharif. His father, whose humanism, spiritual intensity, and love of poetry greatly influenced him. And his cousin, Maulana Mateen Mian of Farangi Mahal, who for him epitomized the enlightened spirit of his ancestors. Then, with great clarity, Mahmood explains the origins of Sufism, Sufi poetry, and forms of Sufi poetry, the ghazal, the masnavi, and the rubai. I conclude by reading to you the last two paragraphs of this introduction. They express his deeply held beliefs as a secular Sufi in the role of poetry in the Islamic world. They also express his pain as a Farangi Mahali at the way in which the impact of poetry is reproduced in modern. He says, it is in the poetry of the Islamic world, rather than in its monumental architecture, that one can find the heart and soul of the Muslims. Islamic mystical poetry may be thought of as a river in which one must drown before one can find oneself. This river springs from the early centuries of Islam in Basra and Baghdad, collecting water from many streams, reflecting manifold linguistic and regional currents, and eventually emerging as the great channel that we find flowing today through all Muslim lands in one form or another. If the great architecture of the Islamic world is the body of Islamic civilization, then the poetry of the Islamic world is its soul. And in reaching into the soul, one finds the very depth of universal being. The river of this poetic imagination has been blocked by artificial dams erected by Puritan orthodoxy, or it has been abandoned to stagnate by the modern world. It is time that these barriers to the spirit of a great civilization were removed and the river allowed to flow again and inundate our minds with beauty and love and provide us with the spiritual resources to dwell in a troubled world. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Robinson. I shall ask Ahmed Jamal to say a few words about the film and Mahmood's role in as the screenwriter. And when we put the program together, we shall try and insert the clip that Alu, you very kindly shared with us. Could you say a few words, please, about Rehem and Mahmood? And after what Professor Robinson has said, I think it's so appropriate that we're going to talk about a film called Rehem. And after you've spoken for about 2 minutes, Allu, we shall ask Raja Saab Mahmoodabad Suleimai to conclude our session with his words on Mahmood. Thank you.
Following on from Professor Robinson's mention of Mahmood's love for, his involvement with Sufism, he thought that Measure for Measure was one of Shakespeare's most Sufi plays. And it was about forgiveness and mercy. And that is what attracted him to the play. And he felt that what was happening in Elizabethan England perhaps was being replicated or being lived at the moment in Pakistan at the moment, or our part of the world. And he had been working on it for a while. I mean, almost 6 to 8 years before I got involved. When he managed to get some funding for the film, and I helped with that as well, I think he was ready to do it. And so the film was actually shot in Lahore. There was a discussion about whether we should set it in Karachi or Lahore. And when I went with David Shanks, who was a producer, initially before Mahmood came there, we sort of made a decision that Lahore would be much more suited to doing it. And then Mahmood came along, and he was not just the scriptwriter, he was also the producer. It was his baby, and he managed to find the funding and things for the film. So I came in as a director. We had worked on several things after Retake had finished, mostly for Farouk. But this was the first like feature we were collaborating on. We started working on several scripts together, but none of them went into fruition except this one. He was very proud of it, and we're still trying to market the film. There was great interest in the film in India recently, but it all sort of is on hold because of the COVID crisis, I think. So they couldn't release it because initially they thought it was a Pakistani film, which it strictly isn't. It's a British film. So hopefully it might be shown in India. And there's not much more I can say about the film, except that Mahmood's was very quick in making changes. He was extremely efficient in adapting to the circumstances that we found ourselves in Lahore. We had to shoot the whole film in about 22 days, in 24 days. And that's how the budget stretched to. We managed to get it done and completed it. Beyond that, we had a great time. I mean, it was a lot of it is filmed in Mia Yusuf Salli's Haveli, where I had worked and made The Dancing Girls of Lahore for the BBC many years ago. And we had some wonderful times doing it. And the incredible support from people, the public, and all was amazing, because they missed the notion of cinema. There isn't much. There used to be a lot of film being shot in Lahore, and suddenly it all came to an end after the Afghan wars and all that. So we used to go and film in the street thinking that people might object, but they would welcome us, giving us food and gifts and sweets. So Lahore phir Lahore hai.
I think very appropriately, we're going to end this celebration of Mahmood's life with Raja Saab Mahmoodabad, Suleiman Bhai, speaking about Mahmood Mia.
I don't know exactly where to begin. The reason is that the moment Mahmood Mia is mentioned, so many things come to my mind. The entire family of Maulana Jamal Chacha, his father, grandfather, and so on. My family has had very deep connections with them. Maulana Jamal Chacha's mother was a cousin of my grandfather. So there was that link. And that link and my father's friendship with the family, with Jamal Chacha, and politically and otherwise, but more otherwise than politically, showed itself to me for the first time in the early 50s when I was 10. And I think Mahmood Mia was about 7 or 5, I think. And Bari Mia and Mahmood Mia used to come and play. And they always came immaculately dressed in angarkha. Little persons in absolutely the attire which people in those days used to have. Angarkhas and churidar pajamas. We used to play in our room in Mahmoodabad house. And then suddenly I found that they stopped coming. And I learned that they had all gone to Dhaka. It was in those days I wasn't quite aware of the fact that, people, about the consequences of partition and what it meant and the difficulties it caused. So I missed them. But then after many, many years, in the late 60s, I met Mahmood Mia again. I had finished at Cambridge, and I went for a year to Imperial College before going back to Cambridge. And that year I saw a great deal of Mahmood Mia. And we shared an interest in poetry. Of course, he was a poet and therefore had perhaps much greater insight into poetry than I had. But we shared poetry, and I recited and he recited, and we spoke about it. I cannot convey to you his reactions. They had to be seen. Sometimes they really reminded me of the musical evenings, which are known as qawwalis, where people go into a trance. I would go into a trance, and he would go, not in the same manner, but in a modern way, in the way in which people today would do. But poetry still moves me deeply. And what I didn't realize at that moment, how deeply aware he was of the tradition of tasawwuf and arfan, which which is called Sufism now in English, and which tasawwuf. So when he wrote this book, the introduction to this book, from which Professor Robinson read out, I found it was a really moving experience for me to have seen that he, in his humility, in his real depth of knowledge, never tried to reveal or show that depth and that deep sensitivity. He showed, but not the extent and the width of his and breadth of his knowledge. I must say that reading again, I find I marked some passages, and I won't read them out, but I remember him over the years when I was in Cambridge later doing research at the Institute of Astronomy, and he would come sometimes, rarely. I would go more often to London. I can never forget his generosity, his largeness of spirit, his humanity, his sensitivity toward suffering. That was what made me truly, truly, truly appreciative of him. How he understood how people suffered, and that boiled inside, and it came out in the form of wonderful poetry. When I think of him, I think of another poet who was extraordinary, and that poet wrote about himself. And I say that perhaps Mahmood Mia said the same thing. Mashatab ay gham dunya ke bagardam narasi bukun az dur vada'am ke shataban raftam. Oh, pains of this world, oh, sorrows of this world, do not try to follow me. I have gone with such speed that you will not even find the dust of my train. When I heard about his passing away, I'm sorry. The thing these days is to celebrate. I think one celebrates with smiles as well as with tears. They're equally powerful. People feel ashamed, I think, today to let their emotions be seen. And much of what is wrong with the Western world and the Eastern world is because we suppress those emotions which are absolutely natural to us. And we think that we are doing something that is extraordinary. So I cannot restrain myself from this. Can I just say this? I see in each one of you, but since I've seen you after so many years, I see Mahmood in you.
Thank you.
And
I'm honored by that.
I see Mahmood in Bari Mia, in Humaira, in Farida Appa, in all of you, in Alumia, in every one of, and I would say even he's not a member of the family, but very much a part of it, and that is Professor Robinson. I'm also very, very happy, and also it's a great satisfaction that he's here because he's known both our families. And I salute him for having written what he has written.
And I see the best part of your father in you.
Sorry?
I see the best of your father in you.
Suleiman Bhai, you said right. I'm very grateful for Professor Robinson for what he has done.
Yes, what he's done, how he's presented his paper, and to Nasreen, Rahman, Chini, to Iman Umar, who has a link with Lucknow. All of you have a link with Lucknow. Farangi Mahal still haunts me, and it will go on haunting me to the last of my days as one of the most wonderful places I remember as a child and as Mateen Mia. And once when Jamal Chacha came and stayed there for a while, and I used to see him virtually every day. That is all. Thank you so much. I must not continue. Bye-bye.
And thank you, Suleiman Bhai. Thank you, Professor Robinson. Thank you, Farokh Dhoni. Khuda Hafiz.
Khuda Hafiz, and thank you.
Khuda.